Hello and welcome back to the second webinar in our three-part series, specially designed for those who might find themselves in an inquiry conducted by the Internal Committee or IC. You may remember that in the first session, we had a look into the factors that one must consider while filing a complaint of sexual harassment before the IC. This session is focused on how to file a response. If a complaint of sexual harassment has been filed against you, then this webinar will equip you with the tools and knowledge on how to effectively respond to the complaint. To help us with practical insights, we have a guest who has been litigating for over 24 years and has advised and represented both complainants and respondents. A very warm welcome to Trideep Pius. Trideep graduated in law and enrolled with the Bar Council in 1995. He started litigating in February 96 and set up his independent practice in December 2003. In his career, Trideep has dealt with a wide variety of civil and criminal cases, including cases involving sexual offenses, capital punishment, terror offenses, matrimonial law, partition suits, etc. Trideep regularly appears before the trial courts of Delhi, the Delhi High Court, Supreme Court, as well as other fora, including the PMLA, NCLT, NCDRC, NHRC, etc. Trideep has also appeared before other high courts, including High Court of Bombay, Rajasthan, Allahabad, Punjab and Haryana, etc. He has advised and represented both victims and accused persons in cases involving sexual offenses before courts, as well as before the Internal Committee. So Trideep has a sort of a very, very well-rounded litigating experience. And in addition to practicing law, Trideep has also taught 5 semesters of elective seminar courses in criminal procedure and special legislations at the NLU Delhi. He has also conducted a short credit course at NLU Odisha and has been invited to speak at the National Judicial Academy and the Delhi Judicial Academy, as well as the Delhi School of Economics. Trideep is also on the advisory board of the Indian Law Review and has reviewed papers both for the Indian Law Review and the Civil Justice Quarterly. Right. So with that very, very impressive background, welcome to the webinar, Trideep. Delighted to have you on board, and look forward to having a really productive webinar today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, as you all know, what we have previously done is we have had our webinar this is the second in a 3-part series. And, the first part was focused on what a complainant should do if she had to file a complaint of sexual harassment under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Law 2013. This second sort of webinar is focused on how do you file a reply or a response? How do you respond to a complaint of sexual harassment that has been filed against an individual, right? So really speaking, you could find yourself at the receiving end of a complaint of sexual harassment, but this webinar series is also for all of you who have an academic interest. You could be a member on an internal committee, or you could just want to know a little bit more about how the law functions. So this is the second part that we're going to focus on, the other side, really explaining how a response should be filed. And of course, as you all know, finally, the 3-part series will culminate in the third one, where we will actually have an in-depth understanding of what is the procedure in an IC inquiry, the process of examination, cross-examination, and general process of the IC, but from the perspective of the complainant and the respondent. So unlike the previous series that we have done in the past on, which is focused really on all of the procedure for members of the internal committee, this 3-part series is exclusively focused on the complainant, the respondent, and then the procedure that concerns both of them. Remember, lawyers and legal practitioners are not allowed to appear before the IC. Only the parties, the 2 parties, the complainant and the respondent, they have to appear in person before the IC. So it's very important that each of you understands how the internal committee or the IC process works in practice, right? So without further ado, I'm going to kick off our session. So what is a reply really? And when does it come into play? So any person against whom a complaint of sexual harassment has been made would be termed as a respondent, right? So you have 2 parties in a proceeding before the internal committee: the complainant who's filed the complaint and the respondent against whom the complaint has been filed. So a person against whom a complaint of sexual harassment has been made would be termed as the respondent, thereby being required to respond to the allegations by filing a reply before the IC, which means the minute a complaint has been made against an individual, the respondent, that individual has a duty to then prepare a response and file the response in response to the allegations by way of a reply before the internal committee, right? So a reply is filed to deny or admit facts and or allegations mentioned in the complaint. Remember that while refuting the allegations in the complaint, the respondent is at liberty to provide his own version of the events. So very simply put, what is this entire process? Really, as you all know, the law provides for each party to be given a fair hearing, right? The principles of natural justice must be followed even in the proceedings before an internal committee. And so, as a part of that, once the complaint comes in, the respondent has the opportunity and the right as well to provide a detailed response. And so, therefore, that's why this particular aspect of the case or the inquiry proceedings is very important. It is important that a respondent file an appropriate response or a reply and either admit or deny the facts or allegations as mentioned in the complaint. And the respondent is also free to add as much information or his own narration of facts and refute anything that is there in the complaint as he may deem appropriate, right? So that's basically what a reply is in a nutshell. Now, two other factors that need to be borne in mind. On receipt of the complaint, the IC sends the copies received from the complainant to the respondent, and the IC is required by statute or the POSH law to do this within 7 working days. The respondent, in the meanwhile, has to file his reply to the complaint along with a list of documents, names and addresses of witnesses, and the time period that the respondent has to file this complaint is not exceeding 10 working days, right? From the date of receipt of the complaint or documents. So 2 things to remember. 1, the IC is duty bound to send the copy of the complaint to the respondent within 7 working days. And the respondent is duty bound to file his response within 10 working days of receipt of the complaint from the internal committee. So these are the 2 things that must be borne in mind by the respondent. Pradeep, anything to add here purely in terms of procedure, anything else at the beginning?
Well, I would say that one must bear in mind that it is the endeavor of the ICC to get to whether there was sexual harassment or not.
Sure.
It is not a general inquiry into conduct of the respondent.
Okay.
It is whether the respondent definitionally sexually harassed the complainant or not. It
Fair
can't
point.
be any other interpersonal problem at the workplace or a difference of opinion on how the organization should work or how work should be executed, including tussles of hierarchy, etc. From that point of view, if the allegation is of sexual harassment specifically, if you will see the Act, it has a provision by which records can be called for by the committee. And it's my belief that the committee should not act in a adversarial manner and leave it to the parties to adduce evidence. It has to be slightly inquisitorial in nature, in that it has more powers than other fora to get to the truth. So if, for example, documents have to be summoned, attendance records, who was where at what point of time. Today you have electronic records to say when a person entered a particular office space, when the person left. If call detail records are required, if CCTV records are required, anything that the organization or somebody else can lay their hands on, which is not within the reach of the complainant or within the reach of the respondent. And if it was within the reach of the complainant and the complainant did not bother to get it because it doesn't help the complainant, or if it was not within the reach of the respondent and the respondent is seeking your help saying, look, if this material is given to me, then only can I effectively file a reply. That application should be simultaneously entertained or entertained before and the filing of the reply can be put off till such time that material is got, or even if an interim reply is filed, once that material comes in, then the respondent should be allowed to file a fullish reply. For example, if the IT team of that company says, look, we can't get you the CCTV recording from so-and-so date within the 10 days stipulated, so let him say whatever he wants, we'll get it within 9 days. But once he and she, the complainant and the respondent, see the CCTV footage, maybe they have something more to say. Therefore, I would think that at the first hearing which they convene, or at the first time when they supply the respondent, the complainant, they should make it clear to the respondent as to what procedure they intend to apply here. Are they going to give the respondent sufficient opportunity to bring everything on record and the complainant? What if he wants CCTV records, call detail records, attendance records? I don't know. Anything else? They went on an off-site, the car number, the details of the bus. There may be something.
Yeah.
So the respondent should be allowed to requisition those records in terms of the Act. I think it is one of the provisions of the Act provides for it. It will come to me, and that should be allowed simultaneous with the reply. And
Sure.
the committee should not act in a very adversarial manner. It should
Fair
be
enough.
a little inquisitive.
Fair enough. So, fair enough, Pradeep. So, I think in a nutshell, what you're saying is that there is obviously a responsibility on the internal committee or the IC to act in an impartial manner and not adversarial, but the objective being to get to the bottom of the truth rather than establishing one thing or the other. Find out what really
They might help the complainant in that process.
Sorry.
They might even help the complainant in that process.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I guess the real objective is to ensure that you get to the bottom of the truth. I mean, what really happened, and thereby establishing whether sexual harassment did take place or not. I mean, that's really the objective. Fair enough. So what you are advising is that if somebody is filing a response,
suppose a person receives a complaint on the 7th day.
Yeah,
I would think that his reaction on the 8th day is not to file his reply, rather to immediately look at what do I need from the organization in order to better conduct my defense. One. Okay. Second, what can the ICC get me in terms of the materials that I need for my defense from any other external source, whether it is the postal department, a telecom company, the transport company, the hotel where the offsite was held, God knows. It depends on the fact situation. Sexual harassment could have been alleged with regard to an offsite. Sexual harassment could have been alleged with regard to a branch office. Sexual harassment could have been alleged with regard to a travel where they went on work. So the respondent should look at...
Are you then saying that while I file my response, I can sort of, before I file my complete response, if I am the respondent, I can make an application to the IC saying that, listen, while I file my complete response, I would also like the following information to be furnished in order for me to do prepare a comprehensive response. And the IC should take your application, try and get that information for you. Meanwhile, the respondent continues to work in the back end to prepare your reply.
Correct. See, look, if you look at section 11(3)(a) and (b) of the Act, it provides for calling for such material. Now, it won't be within the knowledge of the ICC as to what the defense would require or what the complainant would require. To the extent they can gather it themselves that it is necessary, they shouldn't wait for either party to say it. They should simply say, look, ask the hotel to give this, ask the HR to give this, ask the bus company to give this, ask the airline to give this. But to the extent that one of them petitions, and I'm not speaking only for the respondent, one of them petitions, the ICC should make every effort to get that.
No, fair enough. And when there is a request from the IC to let's say HR or to the airline company or whoever it is, obviously they will take it far more seriously than from either the complainant or the respondent.
Any day.
So fair enough. So that's helpful.
An
Pradeep, one other
organization
thing.
in an organizations which don't cooperate with an ICC of another organization really should be shamed.
No,
I mean,
fair enough.
yeah.
Of course. One other point that I want to ask you, Pradeep. Now, would you, and I would say the same goes for a complainant as well, but specifically with respect to a respondent, when they get a complaint of, a sexual harassment, when they receive it, do you think it's advisable for them now, while we all know that legal practitioners are not allowed inside an internal committee proceeding, do you think it's a good practice, or it's recommended that they get at least a lawyer to help them draft the response so that it covers all the points? Because as we know, lawyers sort of approach preparing these responses in a different manner, in a probably more well thought out manner that could be of beneficial to the respondent. So would you recommend that in all cases, or in some cases, or not?
I wish to say two things here. One is, if one can afford it, one should. But in my experience, I have seen people who cannot afford lawyers.
The regular employees in an organization, they're facing a complaint and they can't afford a lawyer.
Both.
Okay.
Imagine a person who's in janitorial and
Of course.
upkeep services
Okay.
as a complainant, complaining against an officer who's in the 6 lakhs per annum or upwards bracket.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Affordability.
Fair enough.
I would say if affordability is an issue, make it a legal aid issue within the organization. One.
Okay.
That is, whether it is the complainant or the respondent, please provide for a minimum level of legal support for that person outside of the ICC, and that counsel should have nothing to do with the organization.
Yes. So as to avoid conflict.
That is one. Second is, whilst constituting your committee, please make sure that apart from the requirements of gender ratio, hierarchical ratio, etc., please make sure at least one person is well versed in the law.
Yes. Yes.
So that that person within that room realizes the seriousness of a legal breach.
Understood. So fair enough. One is, of course, if point one is, if you can affordability, if you can afford a legal counsel to at least help you draft in the background.
I say this for the complainant as well.
Yes, for both parties, and that's one. And also simultaneously for the organization, they should, especially larger organizations that can afford it, they should have some medium of legal services or legal aid for either the complainant or the respondent who can't afford legal aid, so to speak. So they can establish some threshold.
An external member who's willing to be an external member who's willing to do it pro bono, very often. Who's a lawyer?
No, but an external member to support filing the application of either
No. Coming to the second point. First point is, yes, one should go to lawyers.
Understood. Fair enough. Yeah. So I would always recommend personally that the external member should be a lawyer, because they can give, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding. And it is absolutely important that the internal committee is well equipped. And while it may not necessarily mandate that a lawyer needs to be the external member, in our view, for the reasons that you just mentioned, Pradeep, I'm on the same page as you. Definitely needs to be a lawyer, because especially one that is steeped in this particular law. So, the IC may have lawyers who are in-house counsels, etc., who have absolutely no idea of how this law functions on a day-to-day basis, on a practical basis. So having somebody as an external member who understands this law really well is also very, very important from the perspective of having a well-balanced IC that can take this forward. So with you on that. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to sort of take you all through the essentials of a reply. There are a few points I'll walk you through, and then Pradeep can add to it as and when he'd like. So one is that it's very important for the respondent to file the reply within the prescribed time frame, right? So as we mentioned earlier, it's 10 working days from the date you receive the complaint from the internal committee, right? Now, here's the thing. As Pradeep mentioned earlier, if you find that you need a little more time to file a comprehensive response because you've asked for X and Y things, by all means, go ahead, write to the internal committee and say, dear committee, I've received the complaint. I'm preparing my response, and I require the following documents to help me prepare a more comprehensive response. But in the meanwhile, it may take a little more than the 10 working days as stipulated by law, and I sort of seek your leave to allow me to take maybe 2, 3, 4, whatever days extra you need in order to file a comprehensive response. Pradeep, would you say that's all right? I mean, while you should try and file it within the 10 working days by all means, but if you need a little more information that is not forthcoming at that point of time, is it all right to write to the IC and ask them for a little more time?
Yeah, two things I want to say here. One is, an organization which has an ICC and which has a situation like this of a complaint of sexual harassment, please understand that they are not in the business of adjudicating sexual harassment complaints. They are not courts. They are not tribunals. For them, everybody is doing this in addition to their day job.
Absolutely.
Secondly,
this is not their day job.
Yeah. Secondly, the statute gives them a time frame within which they have to decide. So, both of which are relevant. Thirdly, remember the mental makeup and the trauma that the complainant has already gone through. So, you can't have a elongated period of time.
Fair.
Now, therefore, if you're saying that on one particular issue, you need the assistance of the committee to call for a certain thing.
Yeah.
For a attendance sheet, for a CCTV camera, for this or that, and the rest doesn't hinge on it, then you can be asked to file the rest of your reply.
So what you're saying is that file your reply and ask for additional time to file sort of maybe something to add to what you've already filed. Remember
there that it is the duty of the ICC to get you that material.
Yes. So file your response within the 10 days statutory limit.
If the ICC is serious about time frames and you are serious about time frames and the complainant is serious about time frames, then that material will make it.
Fair. Okay.
To the inquiry.
So
and once that material is with you, you may need to file an additional written note to support.
So understood.
At that point of time, you go ahead. But it is not like you can say that, unless, of course, the facts of that situation demand it.
Correct.
It's not like you can't. You see, in my experience, sexual harassment sometimes doesn't hinge on one solitary instance. It is a pattern that the complainant complains of. And the defense of the respondent is that pattern is not correct. Okay?
Fair. Okay.
It is normally, assault is a singular instance. But harassment has a sustained pattern. And there could be that for one particular allegation or another, or a day or another, you may need certain help by way of records by the ICC. But for the rest, maybe you are able to file your reply.
Right.
I am not an advocate of delaying proceedings, but at the same time, with the cooperation of the ICC, I think the material should come in.
So,
time frame should be adhered.
In a nutshell, Tradeep, file your response within the 10 working day statutory limit set by the law. Don't deviate. And if you need to file additional materials at a later point of time, do so. But your main filing should find its way to the IC within the 10-day limit.
Yes.
Right? Okay, fair enough. So, one of the things is that a lot of complainants and respondents, and it's a fair point, really they find themselves in a very, very unfamiliar terrain, in the sense that there's nobody to help them navigate what happens in an internal committee, right? Once you're inside the IC, you have no idea what's going to happen. Now, sometimes or many times ICs typically tend to have one-on-one conversations with both the complainant and the respondent before the formal process starts. So it's good practice to ask whether you're the complainant or the respondent, but it's a good practice to ask or request the internal committee to lay down and communicate the procedure to be followed during the inquiry. So you have absolute clarity in terms of what is going to happen by when. Largely, of course, there are going to be changes in dates. There are going to be changes in procedure. Probably sometimes an IC is hearing a case for the first time. Sometimes it's done it many times before, but this case is unique. Any number of things can happen. But it's good practice for you as the respondent to ask for, or request rather, the IC to give a broad explanation of what, what's the process that they intend to follow, and that'll help you as well plan your life in terms of how to handle that particular matter as it navigates its way through the IC. So asking them to tell you how the IC is intending to proceed and the procedure that they intend to follow is a good practice that you can ask for right at the beginning.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
So, the other aspect that a respondent may want to check is really checking the limitation period of the complaint. So, the law mandates that every complaint must be filed within 3 months of the last incident, and if it's a series of incident, then the last incident in that series, right? So, the IC, of course, has the ability to, or the leeway to file, provide an additional 3 months if required. So limitation, as we call it, as we lawyers call it, it's really the time frame under which, laid down by statute, under which you have the time to file that complaint. So as somebody who's got the response as a respondent, you may want to go through the complaint carefully to find out whether the complaint has been filed within the limitation period. So if it's within the first 3 months of the latest incident, then the IC must hear the case. But typically, ICs take a very liberal view of limitation. They allow it to they even allow that limitation period to stretch to 6 months if required, because that's following the spirit of the law, so to speak. So check whether the the limitation period is within the 3 to 6 month period and not exceeding the 6 month period as stipulated under or by the POSH law. Trideep, any further additions to that?
No, I'm not a advocate of leniency with regard to limitation or time frames. To the extent the law provides for condonation of delay, that's fine, but I don't think it should be on a whim or because it's in the statute book. It should be adhered to. And if good enough reasons are given, yes, delay should be condoned. And if incidents
even beyond the 6 month period, Trideep, can the IC condone?
No, I don't.
The statute has said 6 months. Can the IC go beyond what the statute says?
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
Okay.
No, but secondly, if there are 5 instances, of perceived alleged harassment, and 3 fall within limitation and 2 outside, I would say that those 2 have to be ignored completely.
The ones that fall outside of limitation.
Yeah, but provided there is not a chain running through them, then maybe they can be looked at continuous instances
as a series of incidents. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But if there are instances which have no connection with each other whatsoever,
highlight that in your response to say that.
And also, while you're looking at condonation of delay, please look at the complainant and the opportunities that the complainant had, the empowerment that the complainant had, the agency that the complainant had at that point of time.
Right.
Look at the complainant. There are some complainants who are unable to muster the strength in large organizations to go against superiors in sexual harassment. There are others who may be equally placed. It may not always be a hierarchical structure. You have to view it in the particular in the particular facts of that case and not treat everybody equally. You will have to look at whether there is justification for condonation and not just treat it like as a matter of course.
Fair enough. All right. Additionally, all supporting documents which may support the reply filed by the respondent to be made available to the respondent. So any documents that support the reply have to be filed filed with the internal committee, right?
It is my personal view that both parties should not withhold any document which is relevant to the inquiry
Okay.
and bring it forward at the very first instance if it is material and it is relevant.
Got it.
And if they suppress, either of them suppress it, then there should be an inference drawn against them that they wish to somehow portray a different impression with regard to a fact situation.
So, Trideep, suppression of material documents by either party
Or
could
instances and facts
could adversely affect the outcome in an IC proceeding.
The problem in my experience is ICCs don't look at it that way. But according to me, something which is material, which would go to show the interaction between parties to be something different from what the allegation is. If
Understood.
The allegation is with regard to the first of the month, the conduct of the second of the month, which shows that the first probably is not true, should not be withheld by the complainant.
Yeah.
And if the respondent brings it to the notice of the ICC should take it very seriously, saying, if this was the conduct on the second, and the first allegation is pretty serious, but the second allegation kind of shows that the first may not be true,
right?
Then it should draw an adverse inference against the complainant in such a situation.
Got it. So, whether you're the complainant or the respondent, but I think in this case, since we are discussing how to file a response or the essentials of a reply, I think the sort of key point coming out here, Trideep, is that do not suppress material information, because that could have an adverse.
Come out with the truth. Life is never linear. Life is full of nuance. It is for the ICC to draw conclusions, but come out with the truth and give your explanation for it.
Okay. Even if it sort of adversely affects or impacts the respondent's case, because, I mean, will the IC view it positively that the respondent has shared information, even though it is probably not supporting their case?
Let's get an instance. I would prefer if the complainant said, I was harassed at 10 in the morning at my cubicle, and at 12 o'clock when there was an external person present at a meeting,
right,
I maintained a poker face. I maintained my composure because it was in the interest of the organization.
Okay.
We were in the same meeting. We interacted. I pretended like nothing happened. I wasn't able to meet the head of the ICC, HR head, whoever, to make my complaint. And I waited till the next morning to make that complaint. But we travel in the same carpool. We couldn't help it. So next morning, I traveled with the perpetrator to work. According to me, it doesn't whittle down the sexual harassment complaint of 10 a.m. Just because at 12 she was in a meeting with him, at 6 she couldn't complain, and the next morning she traveled in the same car.
Got it. Okay. So same for the respondent. I mean, if you...
Yeah. But if there was something by which she actually had a conversation with him and she condoned it, and he has proof of it, and she withheld it from the committee.
Right.
Or he gave an explanation, or there was something to say that that act was not sexual harassment and it was just a misunderstanding at work. You see, neither should withhold anything.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So I think the point is made and accepted that both parties have to be very, very clear and in the sense that any material suppression of facts could adversely affect their case. So share material information if you have it. Yeah. Right. So I think that's pretty much the next point as well. Check for any material suppressions. So here what we are telling is, while you are filing your response, when you're looking at the complainants, when you're looking at the complaint, one of the things that should be on a respondent's checklist is to go through the facts to see if the complainant has suppressed any material information, or if there is an alteration in the description of events from what happened and what what the complainant says happened and what the respondent believes actually happened, right? So look for any of those material suppressions, because they can be brought out in the response as a material sort of piece of information.
So Alex, what I want to emphasize here is, when I say material, I mean it seriously, that it has to be material.
Has to be material.
It shouldn't be some nitpicking saying, oh, did it happen on the 3rd floor or the 4th floor? And the complainant is unable to categorically say whether it was 3rd floor or 4th floor. It is immaterial. Material suppression has to be such that it alters the story itself. We were just two of us in the car. And it turns out that to the knowledge of everybody, there was a third person who took part in those conversations. That is a material alteration.
Fair.
But to say that when we reached the building, we went to room 303. Is 303 on the third floor or fourth floor? It doesn't matter. You went to some building. It could be third floor, fourth floor. Nobody remembers. A material alteration should be such that it goes to debunk the theory that there was harassment or such an incident took place.
Understood.
Then it leads to a doubt in the ICC's mind as to, hey, did this happen? Why is the complainant doing this?
Yeah.
That is a material alteration.
Understood. So if you're looking at the complaint in a nutshell, look to make sure that there is no material suppression, and as Pradeep advises, make sure material means material, not minor inconsistencies.
Yeah, not nitpicking.
Got it. And have a look or check to see if the complaint has been filed by the complainant herself or through a legal heir or representative.
Here I have a point to make, Alex, that complainants need not always have the courage.
Yeah, fair enough.
Or the wherewithal to put down a detailed complaint.
Yeah.
They may have already suffered so much trauma.
Yeah.
But if a complaint has been filed, let's say for a person from the janitorial services, secretarial services, by, say, the legal head of that company, because the victim went to the legal head and said, please help me file this. I finally mustered the courage to tell you so-and-so harassed me.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is it should have the endorsement of that person. It can't be a complaint which originates from a third party. That is not acceptable. Then it leads to misuse.
Yeah.
It should have the endorsement of the complainant saying, no, I indeed made this complaint. It's on my say.
And it is, yeah. Fair enough. So check to see whether, even if it has been filed by, what we're really trying to say here is that even if it has been filed by an heir or a representative, the complaint is actually being made actually on behalf of the complainant, and the facts as narrated in the complaint are the complainant's herself. I mean, it's her story and it's her complaint that they are bringing to the internal committee. Okay. So again, as we had advised, even in the previous instance of filing a complaint, even while filing a response or a reply, we always would recommend that the details of the incident must be, as far as possible, brought out in a chronological manner with date, times, etc. So basically, remember this, it is the respondent's version of the events. It's your opportunity, if you're the respondent, to put your story out there, or the sequence of events in the manner that you want to. So give it time, give it thought, and structure it in a way that you can bring out the narration of events in a manner that you deem that reflects what you believe actually happened. Now, continuing with sort of the checklist of the essentials of a reply. So one of the other things that a respondent would have to do is to specify all interactions before and after the purported events of sexual harassment to prove that the allegations may be improbable, right? So Pradeep, this is something that you were very keen that we kind of bring out clearly in this webinar. So you want to elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, maybe we should elaborate it when we come to the three instances that we've given as case studies, because otherwise it will become like, we'll be talking too hypothetically.
So this particular point we can bring out in greater detail once we are at the case study stage. Fair enough. The reply should not merely consist of bald denials, but should also consist of explanations and documents that may prove the allegations to be untrue. Essentially,
this is something I want to explain.
Yeah, please.
This is something I want to explain. Mm-hmm. The Supreme Court has held in one leading case with regard to Apparel Export Promotion Council that, and it is true also, that a perpetrator of sexual harassment doesn't do it out in the open, right? He's
sometimes, not always, Trideep.
True.
Sometimes.
True. But very often. Very often.
Sure.
So now, it cannot be as simple as to say that it's his word against hers. Especially if the direction was given by him at a time when it was 7:30 in the evening, saying, "Oh, please come to my cabin. I need to discuss this." So all I'm trying to say here is I am distinguishing it. I'm sure he has a defense even for that. He might have a defense for what happened then. All I'm saying is do not treat this like a civil proceeding which is adversarial in nature, where the complainant says, I went into his cabin on him asking me to do so. When I got there, I was sexually harassed. And he replies saying, the whole thing is denied. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. You had the authority to call her into that room. You had some business. You had some work. What were you working on? What was the thing? So what happened after that meeting? Did she go back, send a particular email? Yeah, it corroborates the fact that she was actually called to discuss that email. Don't let a respondent go away with a bald denial. In the same way, that is why the respondent has an obligation to explain his conduct.
Fair enough.
And you cannot treat these like civil proceedings where people just come and say, sorry, they didn't happen.
Everything is denied.
Let her prove it. Yeah, everything is denied. That may be good for a civil suit. It may be good for a criminal complaint. It's not good for an ICC procedure.
Fair enough.
Especially if there are instances prior and after which show a pattern of a conduct.
So where possible, ensure that you're providing enough explanation, documentation, whatever it is, proof.
See, remember,
to make the proceedings
in a sexual harassment complaint, the direct fallout very often of a person's conduct towards the victim,
right,
in the instance of sexual harassment, could also be then thereafter that career-wise the person suffers. Now, if the alleged respondent boldly denies this instance, that such and such instance of sexual harassment did not happen, but then the consequences of that are apparent for everybody to see: denial of a promotion, denial of an increment, family member is troubled, some other family member is troubled, a promotion is not given, a suspension is given on a specious reason. So therefore, when a respondent has an obligation to explain every aspect of the complaint fully.
Understood.
And say that neither is this true, nor is that motivated by this,
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered this, Trideep, in the introduction itself. Any documentation that may be in the possession of the employer, complainant, HR, other third parties?
Just to clarify, that when the respondent requests the ICC to summon documents from third parties, he can request the ICC to ask the complainant also to disclose documents which might be only in the complainant's possession and control.
Okay. So if you feel, as the respondent, if you feel that there are documents or evidence or any other kind of proof that could strengthen your case, you can ask the internal committee to get whoever it is who has that information to share it with you. Particularly if it is within the organization or with the complainant, that can be done, and can be done in a manner that you can ask for that information to strengthen your response.
Yes.
Fair enough. I guess this is more of procedure though, Trideep, but for anybody who is in an IC hearing, they have to also ensure that they should be aware of what the POSH law mandates or the POSH Act mandates, and ensure that all hearings conducted by the IC have the quorum as mandated under the POSH Act, so as to ensure that the POSH Act is not violated by the committee themselves. And the quorum as mandated by the Act is 3, and the presiding officer's presence is mandatory. So every hearing conducted by the IC should have at least 3 members of the internal committee, and the presiding officer's presence is mandatory or compulsory. So any hearing without...
This goes, Alex, to the original point which you made, that is it good to consult lawyers? And my point that maybe there should be one person who's well versed in the law in that committee.
In the committee, yes.
Yeah. So that the committee doesn't falter, and nor does the respondent or the complainant.
Agreed. Because these are all technical arguments that could be taken up in appeal by either of the two parties that's probably not satisfied with the verdict of the IC.
Yeah.
So very important for the IC to sort of ensure that they have appropriate legal advice and guidance. And also, a complainant or a respondent should also be aware of the law, either by consulting somebody who's an expert, or do your own reading, do your own research. There's a ton of material out there that tells you what different aspects of how the POSH law functions. So it's always a good idea to keep yourself abreast of how the law functions. Okay, excellent. Prepare for a detailed cross-examination with respect to your defense. And as all of you viewers know, the third part of this webinar series will actually have a more detailed session on how to conduct cross-examination, how to prepare for it. So we're not going to go into that now. This is just a point that we're leaving for you here, that you as the respondent must be prepared to conduct a detailed cross-examination with respect to your defense, right? So
I would say that once you file your reply, you'll know who are your witnesses and what you would want to ask in the cross-examination. So therefore, you will provide with your reply a list of your witnesses who you intend to produce, whether formal or whether persons who will speak from personal knowledge. And you will also simultaneously prepare for your cross. But I guess that's for another day.
Yeah, that's the third part, but that's process that is going to take much longer than the time that we have for this webinar. So we'll cover that in the next one.
Sure.
So as you know, Pradeep was just saying, the list of witnesses is important. Whoever you believe can add value and enhance your response or your matter or your case, your witnesses, please provide a complete list to the internal committee with the name, the designation, if they're from your organization, contact details, and importantly, how are they relevant to your response, right? How are they relevant to the respondent's case or what have you? So that needs to be brought out as well in the response that you're filing. Now, very important, if while you're preparing the response, throw your mind back at the case, at the matter, what happened, and very, very important that you try and remember if there was anybody who witnessed the incident. If yes, bring them on as a witness as well. And secondly, was there any kind of electronic evidence, email, WhatsApp, CCTV, etc.? Not just that might be in your favor, but think of anything that that could actually sort of bring about a resolution to this particular case. And if you are able to access it yourself, do so. Otherwise, as we have mentioned earlier, seek the help of the internal committee to help you get this evidence that may be essential. Pradeep, anything to add?
No, but I just want to say for the benefit of respondents that they have a tendency to treat this in a frivolous way by saying, look, I didn't do this, so why should I go through the trouble? No. If we are taking sexual harassment seriously and we are taking workspaces seriously and ensuring that there shouldn't be sexual harassment, then every complaint should be taken seriously and the respondents should make an effort, get every piece of material they can, fact, document, witness testimony, to show that it did not happen and not treat this as a situation where you simply boldly deny everything.
Okay.
So organization should advise respondents to take it seriously and say that please don't treat this as frivolous.
So a part of, I guess, part of training, creation of awareness and sensitization of all employees in an organization should also include explaining to all employees the importance of an IC hearing, inquiry, or a proceeding, and the importance of sort of taking it seriously, right?
Yeah, whether a complaint is frivolous or serious, and what it merits is for the ICC to decide. But Correct. It's not for the respondent to take it lightly because the complaint in his personal opinion is baseless or frivolous.
Particularly, I think this is seen in instances where the respondent is very senior in the organization, and they feel that this is sometimes we have seen I've personally seen instances where senior members accused of sexual harassment tend to view the entire proceedings as frivolous. They don't believe they should be wasting time on it. There are far more important things to do, like running the organization. So even particularly in those instances, but even otherwise, I think the real takeaway here is take every instance seriously. And if you are the respondent, if you've been asked to provide your version, then make sure you take it seriously, prepare a detailed response on the taking into account all of the factors that we have just put out there for you. And of course, take legal advice as well to ensure that whatever response you're providing is done in a manner that is consistent with law.
Yeah, because not only does the respondent have the obligation to explain his conduct vis-a-vis the instance of sexual harassment, the respondent also would then have the obligation to see why the complainant in a given situation suffered other consequences thereafter.
Right.
Like a suspension, a termination, something else. And we've seen in very many instances where once a complaint is filed, almost in all cases, if there is a hierarchical difference where the respondent is hierarchically senior, there are some consequences that have resulted for the complainant. And
right.
I'm not saying this.
Retaliation.
I'm not saying this from a point of view of, I mean, I'm supposed to be advising respondents here. So my correct advice in this situation would be not only explain why the instance of sexual harassment, the allegation of sexual harassment is wrong, but please be prepared to explain the allegations with regard to the consequences faced by the complainant. Please be ready to explain that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And avoid absolutely avoid indulging in any kind of retaliation or victimization, because that is actually only compounding whatever may have happened, if there is an
incident. Or character assassination.
Right. All of that amounts to victimization or retaliation and can have even more serious consequences for the respondent. So clearly stay away from all of that.
Any reference to the complainant's personal life, which has no connection with the allegation of sexual harassment, doesn't have a place in the ICC.
But even if there is anything that has to do with the allegation of sexual harassment also, in any case, all proceedings as per the POSH Act are confidential. And
that is not the question. That is not the question. The question is, if you are referring to a prior instance of a voluntary, affectionate, sexual, intimate act by the complainant with somebody else, that can't be the standard for you.
Sure.
There must have been consent there. So you cannot be allowed to permit the respondent to refer to an instance which does not involve him.
Oh, okay, of course.
As a defense,
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
So therefore, that amounts to trying to stereotype the character of the complainant.
Without a doubt.
I would never encourage a respondent to do that.
Agreed. That can be that can actually be in some instances fatal to the case of respondent as well, or compound what has already happened. So clear of that.
The ICC should have the sense to do that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. So on that note, we have kind of we have actually overshot our time, but this is basically the essentials of a reply. Now, this is part A of our sort of webinar. Part B is what we are going to now focus on next. We have got 3 case studies that we're going to discuss with Pradeep. 3 case studies, each of whom are probably inspired from real life cases, but the names and facts have all been changed so much that they bear very little resemblance to the actual incident. The idea behind giving these case studies is that a lot of times the nuances of the POSH law cannot be brought out just in a point format as we have done now. The nuances can be brought out by actually discussing cases and the legal issues that arose in those cases, right? So we're going to walk you, the participants, through 3 cases where we'll share the facts with you, and then Pradeep's going to help us kind of understand, what happened in those cases and what really should be the position that a more from the perspective of a respondent. What is the best way to kind of what is the best what is the right thing to do under those circumstances? So let's pick up the case studies one by one. So we have the first one, which is basically the two parties are obviously, again, I say this again, Sumangala and Rajesh, but they are not the real names. So they're just completely fictional, made up names. Sumangala and Rajesh were colleagues working at a renowned PSU. On the special occasion of Ethnic Day at the workplace, two female colleagues complimented Sumangala on how beautiful she was looking in a sari. Rajesh, who was standing close by, complimented Sumangala on the gorgeous sari. Sumangala thanked all of them for their generous compliments. Meanwhile, separately, the post of the HOD within the company had fallen vacant, and the two contenders for that HOD's position were both Sumangala and Rajesh. So only one of them could become the next HOD of that PSU. Rajesh ultimately was found to be better suited by the superiors in the organization, and it was inevitable that he would be appointed as the next HOD. During an office party for the outgoing HOD, which was attended by both Sumangala and Rajesh, a woman colleague, upon seeing Sumangala, said, "Oh wow, you look so hot and sexy." Rajesh too joined in by saying, "Sumangala always looks super hot." After that, Rajesh also imitated the action of whistling with his index finger and thumb in his mouth. Sumangala ignored him. The next working day, Sumangala filed a sexual harassment complaint alleging that Rajesh's imitation of whistling amounted to sexual harassment. Pradeep, so is this a matter that you sort of were involved in and you advised the respondent on?
Yeah, somewhat similar.
Somewhat similar. Okay.
I put this instance in for two reasons. One is Rajesh's conduct somehow doesn't seem to have amounted to sexual harassment before this.
Before this meaning?
Before the HOD's post fell vacant.
Okay.
All right. And it became a knockout competition.
Sure.
Okay. And the other reason I put that in is the choice of language and the manner in which he chooses to, make that whistling thing, which can be like that, which can be.
Yeah.
Now, hitherto she didn't have a problem with compliments. And that was him. It was Rajesh himself who was giving the compliments.
Right.
Along with others. And as you will know that in the version that I wrote, I made it far longer than this.
Yes.
And gave you several more instances of, this is a person who dresses really glamorously to work, whereas he's not that type. He doesn't dress in that fashion. They've been to each other's houses. They've been colleagues for 10 years. So they know each other.
Yeah.
Whatever. But seriously, the question now revolves around whether his acting like whistling amounted to harassment. And, if you go to the definition of sexual harassment, yes, making such gestures can amount to sexual harassment.
Correct.
If you see the Posh Act.
Correct.
Now, it's one thing to say that she has such a comfort vis-a-vis him. That is one line of defense.
Sure.
Correct? So like you mentioned, Ethnic Day. I'm sure Ethnic Day in your problem, because you had to restrict it to a certain number of words. You mentioned one instance. A person like Rajesh would go to say when they graduated, when they came into this organization, how the pattern of behavior between the two of them has been over the last 10 years, and how comfortable she is in his company with the kind of language he uses, which matters. But coming to this one instance, a person like Rajesh, if he has sufficient material, could say that this complaint is motivated because I'm on the cusp of being appointed as the HOD. But still the question will be, whether that act of his was
Correct. I mean, it boils down to that one act, and also whether Sumangala feels sexually harassed by that act, right? I mean, that's what the law is about.
The reason I put this in,
yeah,
the reason I put this in is because somewhere we are losing the sense of reform, proportionality, and the ability of respondents to accept what is correct and change. What you needed in this organization was a workshop to tell them that this kind of conduct is not permissible. You may have complimented her saying, "Hey, Sumangala, you're looking good. Hey, you're looking nice." You use the word sexy. Is she comfortable with it? Have you used it in the past? No, but if you drop the first time hot and sexy and whatever, and this is not your conduct in the past, then it's not something which she ought to be automatically comfortable with. But in his reply, if he's able to show 20 instances where this was acceptable, quay her, not others, it has to be in his conversation with her. Then I can understand that this is an explanation. But still that whistling sound, whistling action may not be. The reason I put this instance in is to tell you that it's very often sexual harassment complaints, one needs to adopt the attitude of, isn't this the case where if he offended her, he should just say sorry? So at the first instance, before filing a reply, you have that provision where you can seek conciliation.
But
it was a case where
conciliation has to be at the request of the aggrieved woman. So the respondent really has no power to seek conciliation. At best, he can request the complainant to seek conciliation.
Yes. But these are instances where the ICC should look at conciliation and say, look, are you genuinely apologetic for what you did? And
sure.
I don't think consequences should be more than that.
So Trideep, what you're saying is that
this is born out of ignorance. This instance shows that it's born out of ignorance.
No, fair enough. There's no doubt about it. So what the organization needs to do, vis-a-vis training is a separate discussion altogether. Yes. Now we are in a situation where no training has happened or no sensitization has happened, and Rajesh finds himself in this particular situation. So, as somebody, let's say you're advising him in this.
What I did was I traced the 10 years behavior and I showed that this was always acceptable. This kind of complimenting her on her good looks and her dressing sense was always acceptable.
It may have been, Trideep, but even that it may have been acceptable for 10 years, but the act of wolf whistling was not acceptable to her on that day, right? And a woman is always entitled to say no at a particular point of time. She's entitled to say, look, I do not like this and I'm going to file a complaint against you.
Correct. So in such an instance, you have shown that it is not a predatory conduct. It is not sustained harassment.
Sure.
This was a one-off instance. Please see, I don't look at sexual harassment complaints as a victory and a loss and all that.
Of course.
Both of them have to continue to work in the same organization.
Very much.
What does this boil down to? That he really crossed the line with regard to one gesture of his. That is what I was trying to tell you.
Fair enough. So a couple of things, Trideep. One is, of course, while advising the respondent, basically what you're saying is that if in this particular case, Rajesh was able to show that over a 10-year period, he had indulged in this conduct. She had not taken offense, and she may have even sort of, laughed it off or what have you, to show that.
No, it was accepted.
It was accepted.
A compliment was accepted.
Accepted
this is not,
by him.
Yeah, this was not conduct. It was acceptable behavior.
Fair enough.
Here he crosses the line.
Now, so as somebody who's advising the respondent, what we basically are saying is that one has to try and show instances where the conduct was acceptable to the complainant.
Yeah. And suddenly you see, fine, it is not acceptable to her, but then you are on the cusp of being appointed as an HOD, and suddenly this compliment of mine is jarring. This has happened in the past. I have complimented you. Okay, and suddenly a complaint is filed against me. I'm like 1 week away from becoming the HOD.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So that pattern, that hitherto it was all right and today it's not,
Okay.
is what got established in the report.
So fair enough. Although I would still
Of
say,
course, I'd leave it to the ICC to decide
yeah, it's the
whether
committee that has to decide
the
whether
whistling,
is actually, because what the response that you have described, Trideep, probably may have the effect of is serving as a mitigating factor, in the sense that
in this case, yes,
to show the internal committee that, look, this behavior has never been negated in the past, and while it may be sexual harassment in this case, treat it as an instance.
And that too the second part of the conduct on this day,
the whistling. Yeah.
Yes.
So that is what she took objection to anyway, right? She has not objected to the comment. It's the whistling that she's taken objection to.
Yeah.
So bring everything out in an effort to show that it has been accepted, and to show that
it is not sustained, it is not predatory conduct.
Fair. Okay. So in this particular instance, as as Rajesh's counsel, or as counsel for Rajesh or the respondent, Trideep advises that you bring out as much information as you can to show that it wasn't predatory. It wasn't as if Sumangala was uncomfortable with the behavior in the past, and the fact that it happened 1 week before the HOD announcement was to be made showed that there may have been some other intent behind it. That said, to all to everybody out there, remember that even an act of wolf whistling, or even a comment of saying that your female colleague always looks super hot, can be construed as can make it uncomfortable for the complainant, and therefore they may be able to file. They may end up filing a complaint of sexual harassment. It may be treated as on the lower intensity from a punishment perspective, but it is sexual harassment nevertheless. So be careful when making comments with your colleagues at the workplace, because unless you are 100% sure that you have a very, very good rapport with your female colleagues such that you can take the liberty and make these comments, we would always recommend that you do not make those kind of comments. All right. So we have kind of got that with respect to Sumangala and Rajesh. Moving on to the second case, which is basically that of Govardhan and Amanda. Govardhan works for a leading multinational BPO. Robin and Amanda, employees of the same BPO from the Minnesota office, were in India for a couple of weeks on an official trip. During an office party at a 5-star hotel, Govardhan took Amanda to the terrace on the pretext of showing her the beautiful view of the sea. Amanda agreed without much enthusiasm. Upon reaching the terrace, Govardhan held Amanda's hand and took her to the bar. Amanda did not resist. Govardhan used his credit card to buy her expensive drinks, and they sat at a place right below a CCTV camera. At 12:40 a.m., Amanda texted Robin, a colleague, that she was in trouble. Robin, feeling worried for Amanda, hurried to the terrace to find Amanda and Govardhan kissing. The next day, Amanda filed a complaint with the POSH committee of the Indian office, or the internal committee, claiming that she was kissed forcibly by Govardhan twice when they were at the terrace, and that Robin had rescued her before anything worse had happened. All right. So this sounds like a very, very interesting case, Trideep. So what really happened? If you can give us a little more nuance around this, and also how did you kind of advise Govardhan?
The reason I put this in and the next case is, in my opinion, these are not cases of sexual harassment. You see,
why do you say that?
I'll tell you, because there's much more to this fact situation than we were able to crunch in this tile. But the reason I brought this out was there was CCTV footage there. And the complaint, like you rightly mentioned, said I was forcibly kissed twice. But the CCTV footage of the instance showed otherwise. It completely showed otherwise. It did not show the lack of consent. It showed consent. It showed voluntarily making out or sexual acts between the two of them.
Okay.
And once the CCTV footage was requisitioned by the ICC, their stories changed.
Hmm.
The respondent had initially filed a reply saying, I don't know anything. I don't recall anything. I was drunk. He did not admit it to being voluntary or forced. He simply said, I don't remember anything. I remember going to the terrace. Yes, I must have punched in my credit card. I don't remember. Whereas the complainant distinctly said that I went there, we were just talking, and he forcibly kissed me, and I texted my senior colleague from the US who came upstairs and rescued me. The text messages were produced, the CCTV was produced, all the liquor bills were produced. The reason I got into an in-depth defense here is, I don't know why the complaint was filed, and one need not always have to be able to put up a cogent case of motive. I don't know. I don't know what the motive is. But the complaint was not truthful. You see, here I was talking about material alteration versus suppression, which we discussed earlier. This is a case of suppression, because when the CCTV footage came, it showed a couple of hours of voluntary sexual making out and sexual interaction.
So it did not seem like Amanda was being forced.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
And the complaint said we kissed twice, and the complaint did not even say I was inebriated. Whereas the respondent said I was inebriated. I don't remember anything. So when the CCTV footage was brought into the hearing, it turned out that the complaint was false. At that stage,
no, but so that's a strong statement, Trideep, to say that the complaint was false, in the sense that did the
2 hours of
hold that this was a malicious complaint?
No, it didn't. That was my difficulty. It didn't. They said that the complaint was false, and the rejoinder, which was filed by the complainant, said that, look, he plied me with so much alcohol that I wasn't in my senses. I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay.
The fact is, he was a senior employee of the company. He took her to the terrace away from an office party. He plied her with alcohol, and he made out with her. The point I'm bringing out here is, there are parts of his conduct which are questionable and wrong.
But is it sexual harassment?
Yes, that is the point. According to me, it is not sexual harassment.
And is that, so that's the view that the internal committee took in this case? They felt that it was not
The
sexual harassment.
The internal committee said that you plied her with so much alcohol that she did not know what she was doing, which I find very difficult to believe, because that was not her complaint, and her text did not have a single comma, full stop, nothing out of place. Her two texts.
To Robin.
Yes, the text messages. And the CCTV footage showed that every time he got up and left the table to use the washroom, or to go pay for his drinks, or to go to the bar, get extra drinks and come back, she was completely within her senses. She was sitting very comfortably. Because if this was a man who had a predatory way of cornering her, then she could have left.
Sure.
There were couples who were sitting right next to them. On both the tables next to them, the seating arrangement was such that it was very cozy. And
so is it possible that because he was in a position of power, she felt intimidated and could not sort of bring that up at that point of time, but mustered the courage during the course of the evening?
No, they were from different offices.
They were from different offices.
They were not reporting to each other. Okay. She was not his subordinate. That's why I'm saying one need not get into motives. If a complaint is false, it's false. But he lost his job because
the organization felt that he had not acted properly.
Yes, but that is not sexual harassment, and I wish they had returned that finding, rather than and said that his conduct was not up to scratch. I mean, who separates a woman from a crowd? And there was another instance here also in the fact situation which I gave, because he saw her with another man. and he kind of ticked that person off, saying, look, this conduct is unacceptable. You should not have relationships within the company. And he proceeded to do the same thing with her.
So the IC felt that it was more of a conduct issue rather than sexual harassment, and therefore the Govardhan lost his job at any rate, but not technically for sexual harassment.
Yeah, for plying her with alcohol.
So IC viewed it as did not view it as sexual harassment. They viewed it as consensual behavior, but induced by alcohol, which they did not believe was appropriate.
No. That is where, according to me, the IC went wrong. They said that it was not consensual behavior because she was drunk, but it was not her case that she was drunk.
No, but if it's not consensual behavior, then it amounts to sexual harassment, right?
Correct. But it was not her case to start with that she was drunk. She changed her case upon seeing the CCTV footage. So according to me, when your conduct results in suppression and material alteration, this is a case of suppression and material alteration, it should not be taken seriously. This was a false complaint.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, I'm not saying every ICC takes a view, which is
all right. We are running very, very behind schedule, so I'm going to quickly go through the last one, which is Omar and Gajagamani. Omar works at as the marketing head at the head office of an auto spares company in Gurgaon. Gajagamani is married, no kids, works for the sales department of the same company. The two of them were having an extramarital affair for over a year. Due to power and ego tussles at work, Gajagamani and Omar had several misunderstandings, following which she stopped taking his calls. After a month of avoiding Omar, she filed a complaint of sexual harassment before the internal committee, stating that Omar had been sexually harassing her with repeated phone calls, despite her informing him that she wanted to give her own marriage a second chance. Omar contends that Gajagamani has filed a false complaint of sexual harassment to save herself from her husband's wrath, who, on discovering the affair between the two, had threatened to file for a divorce. Wow, this sounds fairly complicated.
Yeah, the only thing I'm saying
that we see. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'll explain this within a minute.
Yeah,
you see, there are several acts complained of in this complaint of this man being overbearing and
dominating,
very brusque, dominating, vitiating the work atmosphere through his conduct.
So there were other complaints from other women or from the same lady?
Only one person.
Okay.
Only one woman. The material alteration and the suppression which I'm coming to here is
right.
The instances that are complained of, first of all, they are not sexual harassment. Secondly, there is no cutoff date which gets established. With the filing of the reply, it became clear that the instances she complained of, albeit not sexual harassment in my personal opinion and in the opinion of the respondent, they were just conduct within the workplace. A superior ticking off a person saying, hey, look, you haven't done it, you haven't met your target, this was a bad judgment call for business, etc. You know, instead of going and pitching for the business of X, you went and pitched for the business of Y. That can't be sexual harassment.
Pradeep, they were not, was she reporting to him? Was he her manager?
No. It was a bit diagonal. You have two departments, but then somewhere you have
senior. He was senior.
He was senior in position.
Okay.
All I'm saying is, it came out from his reply that they were affectionate to each other even afterwards. Even after the so-called acts of harassment.
So, Pradeep, it says here that she made it very clear to him that she did not want to continue the relationship, right? Yeah. And she stopped taking his calls.
Yeah.
Okay. And it also says that she avoided him for more than a month before she filed a complaint of sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Right. So, look, they could have been in a consensual relationship. Nobody's disputing that, right? Yeah. And as long as it's consensual, it's not SH. Right. But the minute she tells him that she wants to call it off for whatever reason, her husband or whatever it is, the minute a person wants out, right, then the consent has been withdrawn. And thereafter, for him to continue following up with calls amounts to sexual harassment, right? So
yes,
what?
it does. It does. The instance as I wanted to portray here was after the dates of her complaint. Also, there were instances of affection which were recorded.
Okay, so even though she told him that I
And
need
her cutoff date did not match her conduct. That's
okay. So she says that I told him to stop calling me at a particular time, but her conduct even after that shows that she wanted to continue the relationship and not call it
and
quits.
was affectionate to him, and she was not offended, upset, or aggrieved by his conduct.
Okay. Okay.
The
fair enough.
motive for filing the complaint was because she was being pressured to get rid of him.
Okay. So
So what I'm saying here is, here the material alteration and suppression was the subsequent instances of affectionate conversations between them were kept away from the complaint. So it gave the impression that there was a clear cutoff date after which please do not contact me was conveyed, but it wasn't so.
So Omar basically, while assisting Omar file his response, basically all of these are the factors that you would.
He was able to show from electronic correspondence such as text messaging, emails, photographs, office parties, etc.
Witnesses.
Witnesses to an extent that they were actually affectionate with each other. One. Secondly, the so-called harassment was actually work-related. It was like, do this, meet this target, meet client X, don't meet client Y. And
so she was actually upset with a lot of directions that she was getting from Omar, professional directions. She did not agree with what he was instructing her to do. But here's the thing.
It vitiated the work atmosphere. If they weren't in a relationship, this would not have happened.
After a consensual relationship ends, if the person in a superior or higher position makes life difficult for the subordinate or the person in a weaker position, that would still amount to harassment.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
But you're saying that's not what happened here.
No, that's not.
Okay. All right. I think we're pretty much out of time, so we'll have to quickly move to Q&A. As you've all seen, Pradeep's given us some interesting incidents where sexual harassment cases, in most, to my mind, are never very black or white. They typically tend to operate in various shades of gray. And as you've seen from the cases that Pradeep has brought out, they definitely can be in very, very the facts may not always be as clear cut as they appear to be basis just a quick reading of the complaint. So to sum up, if you are the respondent in a case of sexual harassment, there are some clear-cut instructions on what you should be doing. Gather all the evidence. Make sure that you get, wherever possible, and if you can afford to do so, get legal assistance in terms of responding or drafting up your response, and ensure that you create a your responses well articulated in a sort of chronological manner, and in a manner that brings out the respondent's side of the case in a clear, articulated manner. All right. So on that note, we have way overshot the time that we had set aside for this. So we'll quickly move to Q&A. I don't believe we have time beyond. We probably can take at best 2 or 3 or 4 questions, not more, because we are already out of time. So thank you for being with us, and thank you, Pradeep. That was very, very enlightening.
My pleasure.
And now we'll move to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you.